Keith bought a luxury home on a private beach in Malibu. But the appearance of great wealth was fast becoming a myth. Because he always spent more than he earned, Keith was now broke much of the time.
The place was paradise, it really was, but you needed the money to keep the lifestyle up, which Keith didn't have. But I used to have to stuff $10 bill in my socks so I could either put $5 in the petrol tank or go and get some tea bags and milk the following day, because we were living on absolutely nothing. And also, it was lonely. It was a lonely old place, because we really didn't know that many people there.
He watched a lot of television. He read a lot of books. He liked reading. He could go for 2 or 3 days without taking the alcohol. But then the craving came back, abstinence, and he just had to go out and start a binge all over again.
As far as the rich and famous of Los Angeles were concerned, Keith Moon was still the #1 party animal.
If you heard Keith was coming, you kind of like took a breath. Okay, here we go.
At the Rainbow Cafe on Sunset Strip, Keith and Alice Cooper formed an exclusive drinking club.
We called ourselves the Hollywood Vampires. It was an all-night drinking club. And it was Harry Nilsson, Mickey Dolenz from the Monkees, John Lennon, when he would come into town, was an honorary member, myself, Keith, and it was only sort of this, the really excessive characters. And Keith would come in, you know, dressed like the Pope, and you never knew who he was gonna come as. But it was always the high point of the evening. When Keith showed up, it was officially an evening.
Like a lot of people on the LA scene, Keith was doing cocaine in large quantities. And there was no one from the Who or their management to keep an eye out. But Keith's real addiction remained drink.
When he drank, he became this other character, this other person. His voice would change. The sound of his voice will become more throaty. Then slowly the face, the eyes, the look. I mean, it was like a horror film, really. It was very, very nasty. When he didn't drink or take drugs, he was just very, very quiet. He was almost shy. He wouldn't come to the phone, he wouldn't answer the door, he wouldn't meet people or, I mean, preferably not speak to people at all. I mean, he just wanted to hide.
I don't think we ever sat and talked about anything other than just insanity. You never knew where he began and where the character began. Because honestly, I don't know if I ever really met Keith Moon. I don't know if there was a real Keith Moon.
He became more and more dependent on this creature that he'd created, you know, the personas of the rock and roll star that he was, and to keep that alive and to always be generous and giving, that he couldn't really do that without some sort of drug.
Convinced he was indestructible, Keith refused to acknowledge that he had a problem. But one night he got completely out of control, and Annette had to call for help from a friend.
Mr. Hagman. She always called me Mr. Hagman for some reason. Mr. Hagman, Mr. Moon has gone crazy, and I don't know what to do with him. She says, could you help me?
Larry Hagman, later famous as JR in Dallas, came over right away and found that Keith had overdosed on stimulants known as black beauties.
The place was a shambles. I mean, the mirrors were broken, the glass doors were broken, and there were holes in the wall, and the dog, he had this Great Dane puppy, and he had gotten into some black beauties, and he had shit all over the house. I mean, it was the smell and the degradation. It was really creepy. But by the time I got there, Keith was okay. He was in good shape. And he said, "Oh, dear lad, how are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm fine. I hear you're not doing too well." He says, "No." He says, "No. I was wondering if you could take me to rehab."
At the hospital, Moon was asked to list his daily drink and drug intake. Hagman listened as Keith described a typical breakfast.
Keith said, "Well, I get up in the morning about 6, 7 o'clock. Always early. Have my ration of rashers of bacon," he says, "and my eggs and my bangers, and then I have a little Courvoisier, and I have a little champagne, and I have a couple of black beauties." Doctor said, "How little is champagne?" And how little? He said, "Well, I have a bottle of champagne and a half a bottle of Courvoisier."
Keith stayed in hospital for 2 weeks to dry out. It was to be the first of several vain attempts to clean up. In one, he began to display classic symptoms of alcohol withdrawal.
The hospital phoned me in the middle of the night and asked me to come, because he had seen little men from space, and there was a little pile of ash on the floor, and that was a flying saucer, or had been. And the SAS were going to come in and rescue him. He was very, very sure of this, that the men from the SAS were going to come through the window and rescue him from these invaders from space. And he was frightened, he was paranoid, and his eyes, they were flickering around. And I spoke to his doctor there afterwards, and his doctor there told me then and there that he will never survive. I asked him what are his chances of surviving. He said none.